We are seeing massive geopolitical movements worldwide. We are seeing incredible movements inside the military-industrial complex. What you're seeing from my perspective, we'll get Dr. Pieczenik's take on this, is soft power coups going on back and forth. You have the FBI on record, and even Judge Andrew Napolitano is saying this is clearly illegal, unconstitutional, spying on the CIA director without warrants because another woman who was involved in the hospitality, a volunteer at the Special Forces command bases. She was a volunteer. They're helping the men in social services. She was a social volunteer. What a nice lady. And you've got the head of the Afghanistan operations sending her thousands of inappropriate, according to the Associated Press, emails. DrudgeReport.com has it all, calling it a four-star circus. Infowars.com has it all as well. So does PrisonPlanet.com. We're streaming video right now for radio listeners if they like to watch at InfoWarsNews.com, so you can see all these articles and documents and photos that we're talking about. But I remember just a few days after the Benghazi situation, we had Dr. Steve Pieczenik on, who is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He confronted a few months ago the Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Dempsey at the CFR and said, that he needed to go public and say, don't attack Iran. That later even came out in the news months after he talked about it. And to his credit, Dempsey went public and said it's a suicide mission. Just as many as the Israelis are saying it's going to be a catastrophe, including the former Mossad chief. Instead of using soft power against Iran, some want to go to this larger regional war that will probably lead to a third world war, at least a conventional world war. And you saw Benghazi. We know it didn't go 5 hours, it went 7 hours. We know there's been a cover-up. We know it was an orchestrated attack. Why did the White House come out and say it wasn't an orchestrated attack? Then Dr. Pieczenik said it was a neocon internal government operation as a false flag, October surprise to knock out Obama. He's been critical of Obama, saying the bin Laden story was a hoax. He said it 10 years ago on my show. He said it right after it happened. Then that started to come out. Stratford responded. The mainstream media responded and said that a lot of the intelligence community weren't buying it. So this became a big international story, but also within internal intelligence, it became really big. And Dr. Pieczenik was approached by different spy agencies, Mossad, CIA, you name it. I was approached off record and asked to shut up. I have not shut up. I have been threatened as well. So, at a certain point, even though I researched this stuff, no exaggeration, 18 hours a day and even dream about it, because once you get obsessed with something and you've got a decent brain, the world opens up. I'm not sure what's going on. I know there's a cover-up. I know it was an attempted false flag at some level. I know there were missiles at that facility, the thousands that are missing, to be shipped into Syria. That's now come out. We said that a month ago. Dr. Tarpley and others did. We know that the ambassador was starting to become critical of what was happening. That's since been confirmed. Pieczenik said that. So that backs up some of what he's saying. But I don't get, and we're going to walk through this here today, I want him to give us the big picture first and simplify it, then get into more details. I don't get if it's some type of internal false flag, October surprise against Obama, because certain power structures wanted to control the military-industrial complex trough, and wanted a hot war against Iran, why Obama stood down, why he lied about it, why he gave the press conferences, why the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Rice, said on all the different news shows that Sunday after it happened, the day after, that it was just a protest gone wrong. Why the cover-up if it was a black op against him? Okay, and now, why are they purging Petraeus? Why are they purging the head of Africon? Why are they purging who was over Benghazi? Why are they purging the head of the Afghanistan operation? This is all happening, all connected to this one woman. Is this woman a operative? Is this woman what they call a honeypot? That's a question we're going to ask. And Dr. Pieczenik, again, is an MD, PhD, an American psychiatrist, trained and served under Kissinger, former State Department official, author, and publisher. He, of course, has written co-written many of the Tom Clancy books, have been turned into major movies and TV shows and series. He's a critically acclaimed author of psycho-political thrillers and co-creator of the best-selling Tom Clancy's Ops Center and Net Force, just to name a few. Trained in psychiatry at Harvard University, international relations at the same time. Only got to have 2 degrees at the same time. MIT. His novels are based on over 20 years' experience resolving international crises and hostage situations for the Department of State for four administrations, StevePieczenik.com. I notice he's revamped and upgraded his site. Looks really good. And, of course, if you really look up his name, he's been involved in overthrows of governments using psych warfare to get people to kill. You never talk about this on air, but the London Telegraph, you can correct me if I'm wrong, says that he tricked the communists into killing the Italian prime minister, things like that. So he's a serious guy. He joins us now. Sir, I know I've thrown a lot out there. That's what I do, so everybody kind of gets some of the pieces. I want to start with the big picture. You said that there were internal jockeying and things going on. I'd like to start with Petraeus and what's happening now, lead that into Benghazi, lead that into bin Laden, and what the power structure is doing right now with the internal tectonic fissures. Dr. Pieczenik, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Alex, for having me on the show. Let me start with number one. Basically, what Petraeus is doing what all generals have done previously, is to basically fall on the sword of immolation, basically take himself out, because he probably did not agree with the decisions of General Dempsey, Panetta, and what I call the choir boys, the people who are Donlin, Brannon, and the president himself. What this really is a internal fight between what is the military culture, which was rising and something I encouraged, against the civilian culture, which was really dominated by the CIA, an antiquated CIA. And it's been a power structure fight for a very, very long time, over 20 years, probably starting with back to the Bush Sr., going through the Clinton administration, where you had two different types of cultures trying to dominate our foreign policy. And it was much more Machiavellian than anybody realized. It was behind the scenes. What you have is a CIA that's really dysfunctional, that is consisting of people who have never really been able to acclimate to the new world, to a world which has become more electronic, more precise, more incisive. And what happened is you have a lot of men who were in the 70s and 80s. Many of them were alcoholics who I treated. Many of them came out of the Catholic religion. I have nothing against Catholicism. People like Dempsey, who was chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Brannon, Donlin, all of whom really were not very qualified to run anything other than a series of past failures. I'll give you an example. Brannon, who's now the counterterrorism head, was in charge of the towers that blew up in Saudi Arabia. He's a totally incompetent station chief who's been an advisor to not only Clinton, but went through Bush Jr., was involved in 9/11, the original 9/11, and has created a total series of false narratives that the CIA has been very not effective in doing, including the 9/11 Osama bin Laden story, the Osama bin Laden raid, which was false, and now it finally came to the confrontation of Benghazi. Benghazi is really the trigger point of the entire conflict between our U.S. military, which is a highly trained, very precise organization, which would not tolerate the ad hoc or the kind of willy-nilly efforts of the CIA to create all kinds of conflicts, and the incompetence of our civilian government, including Obama, including Hillary Clinton, who has had a history of men who have died all along her side, who've allowed men to die. Remember Foster? She herself has been a very disastrous figure in our foreign policy, going all the way back to Bill Clinton, when she encouraged him not to get involved in the killing and the massacre of 800,000 people in Rwanda. Nobody knows about
Sure,
that.
Doc. Listen, I'm going to give you the floor to get into all this, but just for listeners tuning in right now, I understand some of the background. You're talking to people out there in government, not just the audience, but I mean, come on, you've got the same woman connected to all these generals. You've got
No, forget about the woman, Alex. What I want you to remember, all of this is what we call a cover story and a honey trap that doesn't really exist. Whatever the story is, we're talking about characters now, where the real bigger picture, you've got to pull back, Alex, for a minute. The real picture now is what happens when you have a military that was led by Petraeus taking over the CIA and saying that you're going to have to now not work loosey-goosey and out of control as you've been doing it for 20, 30 years, but you're going to be a militarized service. And so what happened, a lot of the CIA is no longer what we have civilians. We have really outsourced special forces who have been on contract. So basically our entire covert operations institution has been contract officers who make a lot of money, 250,000, ex-special forces, and we have the military who's been standing by and being told what to do and to go into areas that they don't want to create wars. For example, in Libya, there was no reason whatsoever to take down Gaddafi. Absolutely no reason. There was no reason whatsoever to go into Libya, into Syria, to take down Syria. And a lot
so now it's purely about the payday, and if they continue this, even if there's a corrupt power structure, there's not going to be an America left if these mercenaries continue to get in the way of the real, national goals and national interest of this nation.
That's correct. The mercenaries was a problem that was brought up to me by the general, the Special Forces general 10 years ago, when he asked me who did I think would be the next major enemies of the United States, and I said the mercenaries that we're creating.
Okay, Doc, we got to go to break. Humor me when we come back and recap what you're really saying happened in Benghazi, and then let's get into what's happening with Petraeus, because clearly the FBI and the Justice Department is now spying on generals without warrants. This is some type of internal battle coup operation. I want you to put it in layman's terms. We have been robbed. Globalism has been a curse to this country. Everything the globalists are doing worldwide is about making you dependent. I'm getting storable food. You need it because it's the only insurance that you can 100% use. I have, family that are veterans and people like that who can't live off their Social Security, who are disabled and things, and that's why I've bought so much food. Charity starts at home. I promote what I believe in 100%, and I believe in what they're doing 100%. And the globalists do not want you to be self-sufficient. I hope you will take action, get the 6 free meals when you pay for the shipping so that you can eat them and see that it's quality. That's why I chose eFoods. As I did my research, I tested a bunch, bought a bunch. The other stuff was like cardboard or filled with MSG or made in China. So bottom line, folks, efoodsdirect.com/Alex. Follow the banners at Infowars.com or call the toll-free number 800-409-5633. That's 800-409-5633. Okay, Dr. Steve Pieczenik is our guest. This is a short segment, long segment coming up. I just want to revisit this because you were on a month or so ago. You said that it was a Israeli neocon coup from the information you had against the Obama administration, who you've been critical of, but you were saying there were all these internal power structure coups. I'd like to hear the evidence of that. Now in the aftermath, why would Obama then try to cover up? Why wouldn't he send aid? There was a CIA torture base right down the street. Why is all this going on? And how does it tie into 5 generals now in the last month? The head of AFRICOM, the head of the Afghan operation, now Petraeus and one other. Although I guess Petraeus was the head of, was he the head of CENTCOM? I mean, this is getting really, really crazy. And obviously there's seismic, the ground is rumbling in Washington, and we're being told it's about these women. I know that's a distraction. I know that's the cover story. I get that. But I'm saying what's deeper, Dr. Pieczenik. So let's start at Benghazi, please, sir.
All right. The Benghazi issue was a totally illegal operation, which was signed off by the President of the United States, who, remember, is part of the CIA. His mother was CIA. His grandfather was CIA. He was trained in the CIA. What you have here is a CIA versus the military conflict going on. And you have basically an out-of-control foreign policy that's run by mercenaries and by a military that refuses to engage in civilian intrusions into Libya and Syria. And what happened in Benghazi was that the ambassador was clearly murdered under the directions of Hillary Clinton, who has had a history of allowing people to die and men to die. So the consulate was really used as a center for, as I said before, RPGs for torture. Now, they had, the mercenaries, the SEALs, had several Libyan and other foreigners in the embassy and the consulate, which was used to torture these victims. And basically, this was a totally illegal operation, which did have a finding. When I say it's illegal, it means that it's illegal by the International Court of Law. It's illegal by using an embassy or consulate. It's an illegal usage. So what you have here is military fighting the CIA, basically, and the military coup that was beginning to say, we no longer want to we don't want to listen to the President of the United States. We're tired of listening to the Bushes. We're tired of listening to Obamas. We're tired of listening to Panetta, who really had no credibility. And we were tired of listening to Dempsey, whom I had warned a month before, as I told you, the Council on Foreign Relations. Would you ever stand up to the President of the United States and in his lilting Irish kind of leprechaun evasiveness, he gave me such bullshit, I would have fired him then and there. But the real issue was that General Hom, the Rear Admiral in charge of a carrier task force, were watching their own men being killed in a place where illegally the operation was not legal, but nevertheless, these were their soldiers, their special forces, and all over the world, we could monitor this for 8 hours. And
and you said this a month ago. They had 2 drones over. So why don't the generals come out and say, you made us stand down and go public? Because if what you're saying is right, and I agree that's where this is pointing, then they're going to end up killing these guys before they can come out and blow the whistle.
Let me tell you, Alex, why. Because we have created, and this is why it's important for our public to understand, and I've said it for a long time, we have created a general corps that is not consistent with what we had in World War II, when we had a George Marshall who would fire 600 generals in minutes and in hours because they would not stand for it. And instead of standing down, they should have never stood down. Ham should never have stood down. The Rear Admiral should never have stood down. None of them should have stood down, because the SEAL teams that were in there, and the special forces that were in there, were told that they would have overhead cover when they marked the entire consulate to say, look, we have to blow this up. And instead, what we've had is a military which has wanted to assert power, has backed down because of several reasons. Number one, America has to understand our military now is a non-functional military. It is filled with generals who have never really been in war, who are really concerned about getting more medals and more positions, but have never asserted their aggressiveness or their warlike attitudes, which they should have. And basically, they're making $3 million when they leave the government and they go on to go to L Street. So
okay, break it down. This is riveting and it makes sense, and you did call it early on.
I'm saying our military has been dysfunctional for the past 20 to 30 years. However, we developed a small core of generals whom I've worked with, whether it was Petraeus or others.
Okay, stay there, Doc. We got to go to breaks.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done's been right.
I have traveled around the world, and I'm telling you, the United States is one of the best places to live, and my ancestors have been here on the Mayflower. And even longer, I'm part Native American, and I don't want to see my republic go into a complete tyranny. And we are all in grave danger. We're going to talk about what this means, that there's obviously a giant battle between the intelligence agencies, the FBI, and the Defense Department. That's undoubted. General sent thousands of inappropriate emails to a woman who reported harassment by Petraeus' mistress. FBI agent banned from probe after he grew obsessed and sent her shirtless photos. Bombshell story is just a smokescreen for something bigger. That's what the father of Petraeus' biographer girlfriend has said. And he says it's about to come out. Local TV station mistakenly airs altered sexually suggestive version of Broadwell's book cover. This is a big battle inside government. They're talking about impeachment of Obama. They're talking about this being the new Watergate. We're going to cover it with Dr. Steve Pieczenik of StevePieczenik.com. High-level former intelligence operator, head of psych warfare for the State Department, worked on peace deals with, of course, Egypt and Israel successfully there at Camp David. And he is, giving us his inside scoop, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, on what's happening. We're going back to him to give him the floor here in one moment to go out of Benghazi to the battle that's happening, where he sees it going, and why the generals didn't come out with this, because it's now confirmed the military sat there and watched. That's been confirmed. Colonel Schaefer agrees with a lot of what Pieczenik's saying. He says it was a hit, a murder. He just says, it looks like some elements want missiles to get to Al-Qaeda because that's good for military business. That's basically what Pieczenik's saying. This is about arming al-Qaeda for the next stage. Will that be terror attacks here used to take our liberties? We'll talk to Dr. Pieczenik in a moment. Okay, Doc, you got the floor. We got 15 minutes left in the segment now. I'm going to stand down here, roll through it in layman's terms. Benghazi, what this signifies, where it's now going, why these generals are all leaving, what this signifies. You know, shouldn't they be speaking out? We know they sat there while those people were murdered. Who was really behind that? Where is it all going? What do you predict?
Number one, the Benghazi episode has been the culmination of illegal operations that have been done under the CIA with Petraeus, first with Panetta, who was DCI, and basically the CIA is no longer the CIA we knew about 10, 20 years ago, where I had men who had worked for our country. They're basically mercenaries who have been hired out of special forces. They've been using drone attacks and killing many, many people. Panetta is seriously should be impeached for war crimes. He was then brought into the military and really does not understand the military. He does not come from the military culture. The military did not accept Panetta's view of drone attacks. They have a much more sophisticated approach to the world. They're much more precise. They follow orders. Unfortunately, the military watched a series of attacks occurring in Benghazi with an illegal operation, legal meaning literally it was illegal, using the cover of a consulate, which is an illegal cover, to use torture of Libyan prisoners and foreign prisoners, which we were interrogating and repeatedly, and the CIA denied that, and was also supplying weapons into Syria in a misbegotten type of foreign policy, which was initiated by Hillary Clinton, Obama, Valerie Jarrett, and the people in the White House. So we've been running an incredible amount of secret wars under Obama, where normally we should have known about it. Our Congress has never covered it, and we have had more wars and covert operations under him than in any other president I know of. And since he's come out of the CIA, he's run by the CIA. What you have here is a cultural clash between military generals who refuse to continue to listen to civilian authority, and I have encouraged that through my lectures at the war colleges, through my meetings with the generals, saying that at some point in time, you generals will have to stand up to civilian leaders who led us into the war in Vietnam, who led us into the wars in Iraq, who led us into Afghanistan. You have performed poorly. You have performed exceedingly poorly. You have destroyed the integrity of the military and the army, and yet these generals watched while their own men were being killed and said nothing. Now, it's unfortunate. They should have said something. They should have stood forward, and instead they were given the cover story by Dempsey, who's a total coward, someone I met, had total disrespect for, and Panetta, another coward who should be impeached and in the White House. And in turn, they were told to stand down. But what was happening in the middle of all of this Benghazi episode was the fact that not only was a Navy Rear Admiral and a carrier task force sent back, which is unheard of, and they were ready to protect our soldiers after 7 hours of an attack, and where these special forces units were literally putting their lives on the line to say, look, save us, and they were told that they would be saved, but they weren't. Basically what happened is this was an attempt by the White House, by Panetta, by all the men in the CIA from the old days, like Brannon, who should have been indicted for war criminals under 9/11, 2001, who's a continuing problem. Donnellan, who should have been indicted for criminal activities under 9/11. And this is all culmination where the military did not do what they should have done, which was to refuse the civilian order and be treasonous, as I have been repeatedly, and defied civilian order to save the lives of our military men. I'm ashamed of our military for having done that. I'm sorry that they did it. But basically what's happened is that there was a fear in the White House, and a correct fear, that part of what I had been doing and others had been doing was to develop a military corps of generals, which Petraeus was part of, say that we will no longer follow civilian orders, meaning that the civilians who've come to power, our president, Bush Jr., Clinton, and Obama, really know nothing about foreign policy. And the people who they picked, Susan Rice, Hillary Clinton, Samantha Powers, Brandon, all of these people are incompetent. they've had a history of incompetence, and they're ideologues. And they basically wanted to go into countries like Libya and overthrow Gaddafi, who was our ally for years, and create stories that really were not even rational, and claim that we would create an Arab Spring when, in fact, they had no solution as to what that meant and where that was going. And in Benghazi, this was the final point of where the military and the civilians, or the CIA, came to a clash of who was in charge. And it was clear that at this point in time, the president committed not only a legal act to use the State Department as a cover for torture and extradition, as well as sending weapons illegally into Syria on rebels where we have never declared war, but at the same time it was the clash to allow the civilians to get rid of all those generals who in any way could be defying the White House. So this is really a coup attempt. This was the taking down of a real military coup to say we've had enough. And unfortunately our military backed down, and they will pay a heavy price for it. 14 other Navy commanders were dismissed during this period, and that was not written about. So that basically the White House, under the direction of Brennan, who's a very dangerous CIA operative who was involved in 9/11, should have been indicted for criminal activities under the 2001 9/11, Donlin as well, and this gets into that specific issue. Now, the person who's missing in all of this, and the most important person who's never been talked about, is exactly the person you were talking about. And that's Mr. Bob Mueller, who for years I have warned that if he doesn't watch what he's doing, he should be under investigation and should be the one who's being investigated. Mueller has had a very, very dangerous history of having come in before 9/11, 1 week beforehand, appointed by Bush Jr. to head up the FBI, and knew very well that his involvement in 9/11, the stand down and the false attack that we had, and basically he was covering that up with the FBI agents. There's no question about it.
And by the way, his number two, just to briefly interject, was saying that they were going to allow an al-Qaeda attack as a pretext. He even gave newspaper interviews, John O'Neill, and then he died in the World Trade Center, we're told.
Correct. And I knew about O'Neill because John O'Neill was the CIA operative who was sent to New York, and the head of counterintelligence of the CIA told me about him, and he warned about it. Mueller should be investigated, should be indicted for war crimes. He is very much a part of this cover-up and has been for a very long time. Mueller goes back, and so does the FBI, which should also be investigated. But unfortunately, we don't have investigative capabilities. Our Congress, our Senate is totally defunct. So we have to develop some kind of body where the American public comes in and says, you know what, our congressmen and senators are useless. Our civilians are useless. But Mueller has to be investigated repeatedly for his involvement not only in 9/11, 2001, cover up the criminal activities, but now illegal operations against the military, the CIA, and it harks back to the time of J. Edgar Hoover, when he used the investigative powers of the FBI to illegally monitor not only President Nixon, which was an illegal monitor, by the way, but used illegal monitoring of every other political candidate and used that as a way to punish our military and our CIA. So the notion that the FBI has worked closely with the CIA or the military is fictitious as far as I'm concerned. For over 30 years, when I've worked with the FBI or the CIA, they have been the least cooperative group I've ever seen. In particular, they also make up their own storylines, which is absolutely amazing. I was involved in the Hanafi Muslim, and they failed terribly. And I defied presidential order, and that was basically treason. I threw out the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and warned him that if he would have come back into the room, I would have 500 hostages killed because he started it. That was basically treason. At the same time, I committed treason when I overthrew someone in the Aldo Moro kidnapping, and that's what we call a hard coup. There was no question that I overrode the CIA, overrode military orders, overrode civilian orders. But in my opinion, and at the directive of whoever it was, in my own opinion, I was able to do that. And for those years, nobody could understand it. That's why I was able to override the CIA and either fire or dismiss them or marginalize them.
Well, now that you've told the Jimmy Carter story, I looked it up. It's on record that you were the State Department representative at the famous Camp David Accord. We should have you on just about the history sometime.
That's correct. But let me get back to this story of why this...
But, I mean, let's get back to you. What happened with President Carter?
Well, President Carter had initially created got himself involved in a bank holdup where he was micromanaging everything. And as a result of that, what happened was a man by the name Khalid, who saw his daughter drowned by the Elijah Muhammad group, held 5 different buildings hostages, including B'nai B'rith, shot Mayor Barry, and we had 500 hostages. The FBI could not handle it. The CIA could not handle it. And I was called in the middle of the night to take it over. And Earl Silbert, who was at that time not my friend, but was the U.S. Attorney General, I told him that whatever happens will be canceled. We'll have a gag order. No one is to talk. Nobody's to say anything. And I took over complete command and control. There were 3 ambassadors from Yaqub Khan from Pakistan, from Egypt, and from Iran, all of whom were just sitting there. So I provided the Quran. I quickly formulated a strategy and tactics where I took over the control of Khalis and told him that this is what's going to happen. And through Cullinane, who was a very good police officer, we were able to change the entire course of a disastrous event where 500 people with napalm on the stairwells was about to die, and Jimmy Carter had no understanding of it, neither did his people. And I literally threw them out, and I warned them that if they didn't come in, they will have a bloodbath on their hands.
Sure, and that's on record, too. It sounds amazing to listeners.
This is not something I...
But let's expand on this. Let's expand on this, then. Sure. I'm just letting people know the kind of stuff you've done and what you've seen. Where is this going now where mercenaries, because the U.S. has been corrupt for a long time, and that's part of the whole Machiavellian system. And, you know, when you dance with the devil, the devil doesn't change, you change. But now you can see it that what these mercenaries and the CIA and 80% of intelligence now run by private groups. I found an NSA base by my house and have confirmed it. Well, it's a private group, data mining. I mean, that's how bad it is. It's just everywhere now. They've made the American people their enemy, too, because that's a new battlefield for them. They don't care about long-term. Now they really just want their paychecks. You've got contractors, low-level, paid more than top generals. And so it's a private corporate coup that we see happening, and they brag about it. Where is it going then?
Well, it is going into a major confrontation with our military, because for every mercenary who basically was either ex-special forces, receives $250,000, and you put in a special forces legal soldier next to him, and he's only making $40,000 or $50,000. You're going to get real conflicts. And I remember telling General Schumacher, the head of Special Forces and the head of the Army, 10 years ago, that our major enemy within 5 to 10 years, and it's right now about Benghazi, will be those mercenaries under L3, under Northrop Grumman, under all the companies that have been outsourced. And Panetta has been one of the greatest users of these L3 communications, as has the CIA.
By the way, they plan to use L3 domestically for civil unrest. They got a giant training base here in Texas. Stay there. I want to come back then and just zero in. Why did Obama stand down then if it was some type of internal operation with the neocons wanting to get missiles into the next theater to expand the war? I was saying, isn't it about phasing out the military, converting it to a social enforcement thing domestically, everything going to drones controlled by mega corporations that have hijacked our country? And he said, bingo, that's it. So, Dr. Pieczenik, you also had another announcement you wanted to make about the CFR. Break down geopolitically where all this is going, because soon the mercenaries are going to be cut out of the equation, too. The New World Order, it likes robots, it likes drones, it likes drone subs and drone ships. Explain where we're going.
Basically, this is the end of the Army. We no longer really need an Army. It will be decreased in size. They know this. This is the end. We don't need Army units. We don't need the teeth-to-tail ratio. In other words, the amount of supply that we need to get actual fighters in who have not done well is very high. So basically, where we are going into is a new kind of warfare, which is space warfare, cyber war, and cyber attack, which is really very important. Does it belong to the Army? No. It really now belongs to a whole new concept that which the United States has to begin to understand, which has to deal with private industry and working in cyber war and cyber security. Because the Army isn't necessarily designated or has been trained in cyber war and cyber attack, although they're interested in it. It's not the sine qua non of their reason. So what you have is the elimination of really war structures that can effectively change the world powers. What can change world powers is now social media, statements like what you make, what we do. The CFRs are finished. I quit, as I told you. I resigned. It was an antiquated rest home for, very, retarded individuals who were just...
But you got to get in Dempsey's face there. It's still useful for that.
Yeah, well, but Dempsey is a coward. I mean, if I were what I normally was, George Marshall, I would have fired him on spot. I would have fired 600 generals on spot. We don't do that anymore. Instead, we promote the generals. We give them pensions for $3 million. So they're useless.
Sure. Bottom line, where's it going with Obama then? How bad is this?
Obama is going to be heading into a very serious problem of impeachment. If he continues all these wars that are illegal wars, which have not been overseen by the Congress and the most effective Congress, but the American public understands that this is not just the president who quietly goes around and does what he does. He has been ordering these covert operations for years on end and is a product of the CIA and can no longer continue this. We will implode in terms of both our national security and also our military will refuse to follow any more orders. And in particular, I talk about our Air Force, which is in space warfare, which has to do with satellite warfare, and our Navy. Because our Navy, when you talk about our Navy, nobody's really talked about our nuclear subs and our fleets, what we call CINCPAC, Commander of the Pacific.
Or the nuclear drone subs. They have those classified missile platforms that have been around for 20 years.
Right. So some kind of deterrence is required. Are we going to be going into another major war? No. But we have created under Obama and the Bush administration more unnecessary wars, thanks to the CIA, thanks to incompetent civilians and incompetent generals who wanted to just get their...
Back in 60 seconds, Doc.
While we fight to retain our liberty, while we fight to expose globalism, we have to realize we're talking about a very powerful combination of power.
Renowned author and expert Joel Skousen breaks down the globalist plan to shut down America and stage a new world war.
In one day, America will go from day to night. And if you haven't prepared in advance, there's not enough time to prepare in 24 hours, even if you saw it that early.
Coming to the InfoWar in November is our new documentary film presentation.
Strategic relocation is a systematic way to think strategically in the future about how do I safeguard.
Joel Skousen, Strategic Relocation.
The freeways are going to be crowded, they're going to run out of gasoline, they're going to run out of food, and then they're going to start to go north and south of those freeways.
Joel Skousen is renowned as one of the world's foremost experts in strategic relocation and the securing of your home.
We talk about natural disasters, the health environment, we talk about pollution, the water quality. My personal experience about being in every one of these states.
Government is digging in for the organized, incremental collapse of society and world war.
The U.S. isn't building huge underground bases and bunkers because of some terrorist threat. They know that a massive nuclear attack is coming. They want that attack to come. Most people won't even be ready and won't be able to get out of town when any of these nuclear weapons fall, because there'll be absolute panic.
There is no preparedness without strategy.
What I tell people is that you do have time. Prepare wisely in advance.
This Christmas, give the gift of preparedness. Strategic Relocation, the film, with Joel Skousen and Alex Jones. Talking about space-based weapons and how advanced they really are with Dr. Pieczenik. Okay, we got 5 minutes, Doc, and Larry Pratt's coming up, folks, on the assault on the Second Amendment. Government is getting more and more corrupt, more and more out of control. Look at the Secret Service and the hookers, all of it. They've got all these super weapons, but they're starting all these wars. They're trying to convert America to the police state. What's the establishment's grand plan? And is there any way to turn it around in your view, Dr. Pieczenik?
Yes, I think it's very easy that the American public now yesterday started requiring that states' rights, that they wanted to secede from the Union. I think this is something I wrote about 10, 20 years ago in State of Emergency, that the federal government has lost its legitimacy across the board, on the civilian side, legislative, executive, judicial, on the military and the intelligence side. It is no longer a legitimate body of our republic. It has become a serious problem to our republic and the sustaining of the ability of the republic to remain. So therefore, the question becomes, does the republic really have legitimacy? And the answer is no. The federal government has lost its legitimacy, and I think those who are requiring and asking for states' rights, I think, are right. I wrote about it in the State of Emergency when I said state after state will fight over water resources, and that from now on, our country has to be concerned about domestic issues, taking care of our veterans, taking care of people's jobs, making sure that we grow domestically and not fund some military-industrial complex that General Eisenhower, one of our greatest generals, said we no longer need, is dangerous, and at the same time warned the CIA that they would create a legacy of ashes. His words have come back to resonate 40, 50 years later. We have to decrease and eliminate most of our military across the board, just as George Marshall did when he fired 600 to 700 generals in one day. Eisenhower kept firing them until young men who were 26 and 27 were division commanders. We don't need an army anymore. We have space warfare. We have cyber war. We don't need that. And the notion that we really need is the greatest national security problem we have is our national debt. And the greatest problem in our national debt is that we're not really developing our own economic strength and force. And in doing that, we have to now get rid of those people who have committed the crimes against the state. Number one is Mueller. I think Mueller should be brought forth more than anybody else and investigated for what he has been investigating. Number two is the CIA, and they should be eliminated completely. Number three, the generals, about 300 to 400, should be dismissed right away and taken down to the simplest core of special forces. Number four, I think everybody involved in this Benghazi attack, from Hillary Clinton, should be indicted for war crime. The president should be possibly impeached. Every one of the men in the White House, Donlin, Brannon, particularly, should be impeached and indicted, and as well as Clapper and the DNI, which is totally useless, and General Dempsey should be court-martialed. That's my opinion. I think that's what's going to happen. I think the American public is sick and tired of corruption, of excuses, of lies. And throughout the world, we have been the only country that has lived through those lies and have been able to break through them. The American public is not stupid, and they will not tolerate that. But the lies of 9/11 have come back, of 2001, to recapitulate again the lies in Benghazi of 9/11. Congress needs to wake up, but it represents nothing. Congress is now a dead body, has very little legitimacy. The White House has very little legitimacy.
And so all we have is giant organized crime syndicates battling for taxpayer money. That's why they want to keep raising taxes to get more corporate welfare, and they plan on using the giant welfare hordes as the political muscle to vote the middle class's money directly into the bankers' hands, while the dumbed-down welfare queens drool, demanding more goodies.
I think it goes back to the original statement I made 10 years ago on your first show, which said we needed a revolution. The revolution doesn't have to be violent. It has to be one which takes down the totally corrupt White House, totally corrupt Congress, totally corrupt judicial system, totally corrupt FBI, Secret Service is totally corrupt.
It's time to restore the republic. Dr. Pieczenik, let me say bye to you during the break. Thank you so much, StevePieczenik.com. Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.